Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, maybe for some of you. We have our last speaker here, Joe Justice. And he's a very interesting person. You might see him sitting in a car, right? So that's the person who is building a car by Scrum. I remember one of those big events at a conference. We just chat about it. It must be testing days, where it was like really a big party visit and everything. So I'm sure he's going to share some of those things. And I'm super excited to have Joe here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Susie. I'm really happy for the opportunity for us to collaborate globally. Now, coronavirus has damaged a lot of companies financially, and it's even hurt some people physically. One of the beautiful things, positive things that has happened is it's so much easier for us to connect globally right now. And I'm grateful for taking advantage of that. I'm right now in the United States. I'm in Southern Washington, and I'm in a Tesla Model 3 race car. I use this car as my mobile office when I'm in the United States, and I travel to clients and go from racetrack to racetrack, developing environmentally friendly motorsport, which is super fun for me. The topic that I'd like to share with is the best I've learned over the last 6 years of executive management consulting, of how to emerge from a crisis stronger, and with everything that I and all of us are learning about specifically emerging stronger from the coronavirus situation. This includes information from the United States Army, the Australian Army, the Australian Special Forces, and the Special Task Force on the economic recovery for coronavirus. And it includes information from Palace in Italy, one of the first countries to have a lockdown and having very serious economic restart implications. It includes information from Peter Stevens in Switzerland, where the economic recovery was handled much more smoothly, arguably. We'll see what happens with a potential wave 2. My own experience in Tokyo, my own experience in Switzerland, and my own experience now in the United States, working with the Detroit Big 3 automotive manufacturers and to some extent Starbucks and Amazon. Let's get to it. I'm Joe Justice. I'm the author of the Scrum Hardware Guide. I'm currently chair of the Agile Business Institute, and I am the founder and a member of Team Wikispeed, using Scrum to manufacture cars and car products. Currently, we're using Scrum to improve the motorsport capability of Teslas. We think they're a great platform, and the price has come down enough that many people can afford one globally. And we think it's an excellent, safe motorsports platform. In addition, we do also still have our own products. You may have seen my TEDx talk, and you may have seen me on Primetime News. Here's our current situation. Globally, companies are still laying off staff. Volkswagen predicts annual sales will be down 15 to 20% for the entire year. Right now, it's down by more than half. Ford has a $2 billion loss in Q1. Geely and Volvo are in mass layoffs. The news says Volvo needs cash in the crisis, just like everyone else. To compound that, we don't know the total effect COVID-19 will have on organizations, financially, way of working, remote working. We don't know the total effect, but what we do know is these companies are undergoing change quickly right now. And for Agilists like us here at Agile100, I think it gives us an opportunity to be part of that organizational change that we haven't had ever before, because companies are reinventing themselves. In the United States, the Center for Disease Control warns of a second wave. They don't know the implications. They don't know the business implications, the humanity and health implications, but it could happen. My COVID test was conducted right after leaving the Seattle airport. I was in Switzerland when lockdown started there, when mandatory quarantine was starting there for international travelers. And I went to my apartment in Japan, in Tokyo, where I work with companies there like Toyota and Mitsubishi and NEC and Sony. My COVID test was in a drive-up situation, driving up to a temporary tent with a heater inside, like you'd have at a sidewalk cafe or bistro. A healthcare professional walked out in full protective gear and swabbed me. Luckily, my test was negative. What I was impressed by is how rapidly and affordably these testing centers had been set up. In 3 weeks, we started to see hospitals in the United States in construction deploying hospital expansions. This is completely unheard of for construction in the United States. Interesting to me, it's exactly the practices that we all have been using for Scrum and hardware since 2006. It's modular, repeatable building blocks that are able to be deployed fast and over conventional infrastructure. In the United States, there's a certain maximum dimension of container that you can transport on road legal roads. That's the building block size. They're connected in module. They have high-performing teams assembling them in chunks, and they're using some of the practices of extreme manufacturing. I think what this teaches us is if we want to get involved with Agile in construction, there's hunger now because some more companies are proving it's possible, and there are a lot of clients saying they'll pay more for it to come fast as long as the quality stays high, which is what we're seeing now by using Agile hardware and extreme manufacturing. The big three automakers in the United States used to be GM, Ford, and Chrysler. Well, now it's Tesla, but GM, Ford, and Chrysler still have mass employment in the United States. It's really important for health, wealth, and well-being for these companies to maintain the ability to employ a lot of people in healthy ways. Ford pivoted within 3 weeks to turn their logistics online to deliver personal protective equipment, PPE, to hospitals and clinics and healthcare professionals around the world. Ford is absolutely a global company, and they turned on their global supply chain to take advantage of that. They were able to do that within 3 weeks. I'd like to compare that to the speed of a traditional project in these companies. To change the bumper shape, the front of the car, the bumper, just the shape, the way it looks, that's what's called a minor model change, and that's 2.5 to 3.5 years. That's what waterfall looks like in hardware for a lot of these large companies. For Ford, it really surprised them and a lot of other people that they were able to pivot their supply chain to shipping masks, face shields, gloves, hospital gowns within 3 weeks. General Motors did what General Motors does really well, mass assembly. They pivoted to mass assembly of an existing ventilator design in 3 weeks. In 1 day, they went to customer sites, hospital sites, with gloves and masks on and protective gear to ask physicians who are actively handling active COVID-19 patients, what do you really need and how do you need it? They then went back to deploy to the customer's need immediately and were online in 3 weeks. Imagine this. They did it exactly using short cycles, customer-centered design, rapid feedback loops, monotasking, working on one project at once. It's exactly what Agile coaches in all industry have been doing since, in some cases, the 1990s. Toyota did what Toyota does really well, mass production. This is a team at Toyota. Mike Tromans, who I trained as a certified Scrum Master and then coached at Toyota, was supporting this team. This team designed a new face shield for hospitals in mass production, 3D printed the tooling, which is something Toyota would never do. 3D printing is considered not high enough quality for mass production parts in Toyota, especially not for an optical part where you need to see through it. In this case, Toyota went to the customer first and said, what do you need and how do you want it? The customer described their need, Toyota iterated on it, showed them prototypes that had been mass produced in 3D printed tooling, 3D printed molds and dies. The customer said, this is optically clear enough. Because the customer said they want it right now, Toyota went to mass production with 3D printed tools. Now, those 3D printed dies and molds will wear out more quickly than machined metal tools. Toyota did something they'd never done before in production. They violated their company policies. They deployed products that had been pulled, mass produced from 3D printed tooling while they made the metal dies. They simply switched production over to the metal dies when the metal dies arrived. The 3D printed dies hadn't even worn out yet, so they never had any gap in production. And they were able to be in mass production in 3 weeks from the idea of launching the product. That's a completely new pace of delivery. And it was done with small, co-located, cross-functional teams working on nothing else, single focus, trained in agility, in this case, certified Scrum Mastership. It's exactly what you would expect in a team, no matter what they were making. Tesla did what Tesla does really well. They designed new product. I don't know if most people here know. Most cars on the planet have a minor model change every 2.5 to 3.5 years. For some companies, it's every 4 years. And a major change every 5 to 11 years. Tesla has a change in production to the Model S 27 times a week. The pace of innovation, the agile manufacturing and agile design at Tesla is far and above the best in the world. And you can see it in their stock price. You can see their stock price climb versus a company that doesn't focus on innovation. Instead, their main focus is continuous improvement and waste reduction. And you can see the market currently values globally innovation at a higher level than waste reduction or continuous improvement. Now you have to have both, and that strong basis is completely vital. You can see both companies had a stock price drop when COVID-19 came out. Both companies had mass shutdowns forced across their global supply chain and across their own manufacturing operations. And both companies had financial impact. Tesla first said, what are we good at making? And they realized SpaceX, another company tightly coupled to Tesla, the same CEO, Elon Musk, makes life support systems for their rockets. Life support systems have some components that are similar to ventilators. Tesla makes heating, ventilation, and cooling systems with hospital-grade filters on their cars. And that's quite similar to ventilators. Tesla then went to the top ventilator manufacturers on the planet, arguably, and said, we'd like to make something even better than you've been able to if you're willing to partner with us. They formed a partnership to share design, share intellectual property, which most intellectual property Tesla then open sources. Tesla then, in 3 weeks, on their Sprint 2 demo with customer feedback, showed a video of a functioning new ventilator that's arguably the best in the world. A significant improvement in the state of the art globally in 3 weeks. That was the Sprint 2 demo. You can see a screen capture of it in the bottom right of this screen. You can watch that Sprint demo, that Sprint review, on the YouTube link at the bottom of the screen. The timeline of it is at the top right. And you can see what the market thought of Tesla's ability to innovate even during a crisis. They grew Tesla's valuation to almost as high as it was before COVID-19. And this is when the global markets are still completely unknown. But the global financial markets say, in this case, it's the New York Stock Exchange, but the global markets have had a similar financial trend. Companies that can innovate even in a crisis are considered the highest financial bet. And it looks like that's propelling a real interest in wanting to have shorter development cycles, not 2.5 year, not 3.5 year, but 1 week development cycles. And it looks like what Agile practitioners around the world know is exactly what all these hardware companies really want right now. All of these projects at Ford, GM, and Tesla and Toyota were unlikely, but they were wildly successful by their customers' assertion anyway. These projects suffered from a worst case scenario of project management. They had changing requirements even late in development. They had no defined processes and tools for the response. They had a lack of clear contracts. They had no agreed plan. And they still shipped 5,200% faster than business as usual. The question for us as Agilists and as interested professionals all over the world is why? It looks like a primary contributor was monotasking. I conducted a study of 3,500 business professionals from companies like Sony, Lixil, Mitsubishi. I did this at MIT Sloan. I did this with the US Air Force. I had a chance to do this with Siemens, with Bosch, globally, with 3,500 business professionals. How well are they able to switch context, and what's the loss? It turns out if people work on 3 projects at once, alternating chunks of 3 projects, they finish project A, B, and C. It takes a certain amount of time. Whereas if they conduct 3 projects sequentially, they force themselves to monotask, and they do tell the people that want project B and C, I am not working on it now. It's going to be next or next. Here's the difference in time. Project A does ship 500% faster, 5 times faster. Project B ships 250% faster. Project C ships 167% faster. I'm working on this white paper right now with Janos, and I'd be happy to have contributors help get this published in industry journals now that the data has been collected. Interestingly, this is almost identical. It's within 1% of Gerald Weinberg's table of context switching loss, which was proposed as a rule of thumb. It turned out Gerald Weinberg was incredibly accurate in his guess. Mass production is pivoting. We're seeing temperature checks when people start work. We're seeing social distancing, extra shift time for disinfection tools and workspace. At Ford, they're prototyping wristbands, where employees wear wristbands that vibrate if they're within 2 meters or 6 feet of each other to help them ensure social distancing. We're seeing plastic barriers installed in the workplace to help ensure separation. We're seeing lanes on walkways to help keep people 2 meters or more apart. We are seeing queuing points for customers and staff, and we're seeing the customer experience itself changing globally. Paolo Semichelli, my colleague and the author of the book Scrum for Hardware, which I highly recommend for companies undertaking this agile transformation in hardware. Italy was one of the first countries to have a very full lockdown. It was enforced by the law. If you went outside without a specific reason, you could be put in jail and fined. The Italian economy is going to be a case study for all of us. How does that affect it in the short and longer term? What Paolo has noticed as this economy is resuming, going into phase 1 and phase 2, and critical businesses are resuming, is even critical business operations are being forced to shut down if they have COVID-like symptoms discovered on the factory floor. In hardware, this matters even more because we actually need to physically be there to assemble the parts, package the parts, deliver the parts, weld the parts, machine the parts, mold the parts. Now, some factories are full remote. They're robotic, and the factory employees log in and remote into the factory. In that case, it's exactly like an Agile software team. But a lot of these operations still have physical hands-on work. In these cases, what Paolo observed and taught me is if anyone in the company has COVID-like symptoms, a high fever, a aggressive cough, whether it's COVID-19 or not, they might just have bad allergies or a fever. They have to go home for a week. Now, this wasn't originally the intention, but company policies are deploying this, and I'm seeing this around the world emerging now. And government policies are backing this up. So these people have to go home for a week, and they have to take a coronavirus test. Because the coronavirus test is not 100% accurate, they have to take a second test before resuming work. Well, here's the problem. Anyone the company cannot prove did not have contact with them also has to enter quarantine for a week. In production operations, like an Amazon fulfillment center, for example, or any packaging center or any manufacturing center, that can take an entire shift offline in an entire building at a time. And in many companies, they have overlapping shifts, meaning the entire facility is shut down for a week. And the risk percentage isn't just the risk of someone contracting COVID-19. The risk percentage is anyone with a fever or an aggressive cough or other COVID-like symptoms, which is a much higher percentage likelihood. And a lot of companies are shutting down. What Paulo has found successful is deploying agile teams, where the teams work in small teams and have remote shift change meetings. So everything Agile coaches and Agile practitioners are learning about conducting daily stand-up meetings, product backlog refinement, retrospective and sprint review remotely through remote tools is now suddenly top interest for all these physical companies, all these manufacturing supply chain companies doing this remote, even though their work is physical. The physical work now is conducted in smaller teams, so only the team at a time has to isolate. That means to get performance, these teams are suddenly interested in increasing production by reducing handoffs and cross-training and increasing their full stack capabilities so they don't have to physically interact with other teams. That means they're interested in T-shaped training and cross-functional teams. These isolated autonomous teams then prioritize their own shift activities and conduct their own impediment removal. The product owner and scrum master role are becoming really popular in all of these companies. Again, I would like to thank Paolo Samichelli for teaching me this. He's using an active-active network analogy and now even a cloud-based network analogy. For more information on this, I would encourage you to contact Paolo Samichelli, and also James Keyes in the United States has been doing a tremendous amount of research by doing in companies of cloud-first work. In 1967, Melvin Conway was quoted as saying, "Any organization that designs systems will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure." That's become world famous as Conway's Law. If companies use a waterfall structure, which I've illustrated one example of a waterfall handoff phase gate structure here, the products they have the highest likelihood of a single point of failure and maximum regression. They also take the longest to develop. This is traditional supply chain. This is traditional manufacturing. This is Toyota single one-piece continuous flow. And in some ways, this is not the desired end state. If someone in manufacturing and supply chain has a fever or potentially actually contracts coronavirus, in either case, they're quarantined. All supply chain operations now need to be rethought and rebooted because anyone that was working physically with that supply chain person is now also in quarantine. That could potentially bottleneck the entire company's operations, all of them. What works better than shift-wide quarantine and facility-wide quarantine and the entire value stream map affected is what I do take credit. I think this is an important thing that I'm proud of. I do call it Justice's Law. The modules of the system define the structure of the organization. Here's what I mean by that. It's what Wikispeed has been prototyping since 2006, making cars. If the product is split into loosely coupled independent modules, which is a prerequisite for this stuff to go fast. I mean, just like object-oriented architecture is a prerequisite for most types of software to go fast. It's the same thing, it's modern architecture, whether it's hardware or software, fintech, medical devices, regardless. If there is a team for each module, it goes really fast. What I found working in Silicon Valley is you then want company as a service teams, a funding team, and that can and should be run with Scrum. I learned that with a rocket company in California, which will maintain namelessness. In Silicon Valley, to keep top talent, they also have a gourmet team. It's not accidental that Google serves excellent sushi. Having these company as a services teams that prioritize morale, health and well-being, funding and technical excellence at the same level is completely necessary for these top performing teams. There's facilities teams to make sure there's clean facilities, internet, tasty food. These companies also have world-class coffee teams. I'm not even kidding. I don't know how many of you have worked in the 5 wealthiest companies in the world. I've been absolutely privileged to work with all 5 of them. And they have top-tier world-class coffee teams as a first-class function of the organization. At Tesla and SpaceX, they serve excellent hot meals at all campuses every 3 to 4 hours around the clock. And they have world-class baristas and baristas. These are companies as services teams. Meanwhile, the delivery, the architecture, the design, the management, even cash distribution and pricing. And I know this will be a shock to most people, but everything that was a waterfall step is now done independently by the teams. The teams are like their own little companies. Now, Justice's law says these teams are like little companies. They have company as a services team. If someone in this model has COVID-like symptoms, only one module is offline because only one team is in immediate physical contact and parts are sanitized before they're distributed from one team to another. All other teams continue innovation and production with the previous version of the affected module. This is an active, highly available architecture. This is what we've learned about robustness in data centers and processing and compute centers. This is cloud-first architecture for production and innovation. It also works for finances. If this project has 100 million US dollars or 100 million euro, and COVID-19 happens, and the company input, financial input, drops to 10 million. It's decimated. It's dropped by an order of magnitude. Now, this is exactly the story a lot of companies, especially suppliers all around the world, have experienced right now, especially in America. The American economy hit is very interesting and will be a case study for the whole world. In a lot of companies, total available money in has gone down 90%. And companies are reacting many different ways. One of those ways is mass layoffs. There is higher unemployment in the US right now than there has been since what the United States calls the Great Recession of the 1930s. It's at a record high. It's been higher since wartime. Another option, because I don't like that option. My perspective on business is the purpose of a business is to employ as many people as responsible and help them have a healthy, happy life. If that is interesting to other companies, then everything I'm about to say will make a lot of sense. If people have a different belief in what the purpose of a business is, what I'm about to say won't pertain to you. But if you resonate with my belief that the purpose of a business is to employ as many people as possible and help them have a happy, healthy life, then this makes a lot of sense. If the company has lost a bunch of money, so there's 10 million coming in instead of 100 million, what I do in my company and what I coach as an executive consultant is to host Meta Scrum, very similar to the way Jim Copleen writes about it in the recently published book, A Scrum Book, The Spirit of the Game, with many other highly accomplished authors. In the Meta Scrum pattern, a representative from all teams comes together to negotiate what are they going to do with the money. A modification that I will say is mandatory is this must be in front of all staff, so all staff can lobby their representative in real time. If everyone talks, it's cacophony. In a company of 100,000 or hundreds of thousand employees, that doesn't scale. But if there's a representative from all companies and their teams can actively lobby them in real time, it does work. And the Meta Scrum pattern can support this. And many scaling frameworks of agility can support this. In any case, there's a real-time financial conversation. What happens is the company decides what actually are the highest priority projects, be they projects to truly help people as much as possible, or be they projects to focus on maintaining the funding that's there and grow funding. Both are a good idea, and that's company strategy. So there's $10 million coming in that's allocated across the highest priority projects. Then there's a real, frank, real-time, transparent conversation to say, all staff, which of these projects do you want to work on? This is all the money we have. Which of these projects do you want to work on? Then those companies, those teams, suddenly decide which project they're going to be on. This is how I will do a self-organization team launch. And they divide up the money. These are real-time new salaries. And the money is only distributed on certain definition of done milestones, lean startup milestones. I absolutely use Eric Rie's book, Lean Startup, for this. It must be a functional lean startup that has value of answering a question of what are we going to do next, or is actually saleable in order for funding to be released. When funding is released, that's when the teams distribute the salary across everyone on the team. People can choose to opt out of the company because everyone's income is going to be much lower. If the company's income goes down, the project funding level goes down, and that means the available funding for all staff is down. But in this case, no one loses their job. Just everyone makes less money. A great example of a company doing a very similar version of this is Meritor. They're an automotive supply company, among other things, in the United States and globally. And their income went down. And they reduced everyone's pay across the whole company. They said, you can leave the company if you want to, but we're not going to lay anyone off. Just everyone makes 40 to 50% as much as they did before. And as soon as our income level returns to where it was, everyone's income will go back to where it was. So there's job security. It's just more limited. This works really well with module teams because module level is a level that can be funded by the organization. It's compatible with top level leadership. Now, the top level leadership model that works well for me is distributed decision-making across the teams themselves. I don't use a separate product owner team or anything like that. For more information on that, we'll have to do another session on group Scrum. In a crisis, Agile companies save jobs. This is the bottom line and the most important line, because the angle I am coming from is the purpose of a company is to employ as many people as responsible and help them be happy and healthy. Let's overlay this over the Spotify model, for which I have a lot of respect. Henrik Nieberg got to go public about how this was evolving at the time at Spotify, and my best friend, Paul Takken in the Netherlands, helped roll this out and was arguably the lead of rolling this out at ING Bank. Here's how the WikiSpeed model, Justice's Law, overlays on that. It looks almost the same. There's a few key differences, but not many. These teams are aligned to modules. These module teams have release goals. These modules are a component of the product that are going to be made, physical components with embedded software and apps and everything else. These teams have communities of practice across teams and quality circles to help them rigorously hit their targets. And they're grouped by release goal. I call this group Scrum largely to be agnostic, because you can run this with parts of the Scaled Agile framework inside there if you want to, or with less, or Scrum at Scale, or DAD, or any of the Agile frameworks are compatible in this idea. But the method of how the teams are split is where I will apply Justice's Law. And that's what creates the highly robust system that's compatible with what we're observing now globally as companies shift, as they're emerging from the crisis. This works in great big companies. Volkmar Denner is the chairman and CEO of Bosch, hundreds of thousands of people globally. And Volkmar Denner takes agility as the top executive priority. I was brought in to work directly with Volkmar Denner and the board of Bosch and the board above the board at Bosch to roll this out. And I'd like to show you what happened. Here's a hardware Agile team at Bosch. In Sprint 1, they realized a customer problem, and they went to the customer site. These are freight trains. These are freight locomotives, huge, heavy haul trains. And they put a Bosch part on the front of the train to test it with the customer and get feedback in Sprint 1. In the next 4 sprints, 5 sprints total, these teams developed these hardware products with embedded software, with supply chain, with manufacturing process every week, developing functional prototypes. And in 5 weeks, they had a saleable solution. Every single week, they were with the customer testing in real time. They even went to a train museum where there was a piece of train track and an operational locomotive where they could go back and forth indoors, weather independent, to test in real time 24 hours a day. And they tested at the train site in the weather. That's Scrum in hardware. What I've learned doing this is it's really intense because you're constantly having conversations with your supply chain that they're not used to having, and they're pushing back saying, can't I just deliver in 18 months like I did before? And the conversation is always, what can you give me today? It's very different. It's the same with management. It's the same with working, if there's traditional management like there is in Bosch. In a lot of startups, there isn't even traditional management. It's part of the team. And I believe that's a more pure, and it's definitely faster and more affordable model. But this is compatible with large, traditionally top-down organizations as well, as they move towards the flat, classless, equitable agility model, which I believe is the destination for financial sustainability, honestly. What I've learned by doing this is you have to prioritize fun. You have to. Here's actually 4 teams building cars with me at Team Wikispeed in one of our microfactories, this one in Seattle, Washington. You can see the product owner is drinking a glass of white wine, Weisswein. You can see the development team is having Oktoberfest with steins of beer and Lederhosen and dirndls. And they're tracking 4 sprints on their group Scrum board of their velocity as they're burning up and accelerating done modules of car that meet the definition of done multiple times an hour. That's how fast these teams are going. To maintain that level of speed, we have to prioritize fun. The fastest this has ever been done, this was in Switzerland, was building a new car in 27 minutes. We repeated this at Agile testing days and also at Scrum days in Germany with multiple teams. These included some new design. So yes, you can absolutely assemble cars really, really quickly. That's a real thing. It takes 4 hours to 4 days in most companies, depending on the complexity of the car they're building or the state of their technical excellence, their excellence in engineering practices. But building a car really fast is possible. Doing that with new design and some new procurement, that's novel. That's Agile hardware, and that's what we're talking about here. I've been lucky enough to do that with aviation now and some of the most complex projects in the world. I've gotten to work with the F-35, the F-22, and the Saab Gripen. In commercial aviation, I've gotten to work with Boeing's next commercial and passenger aircraft. It's simply called the new model aircraft currently. I've gotten to work with Mitsubishi on their regional jet, which has a lot of problems. And they're trying to pivot and rescue that jet by deploying agility across the organization. We'll see if they can rescue the project. And of course, this does prioritize faster tooling. When companies make the change, the secret to this Agile hardware stuff, I think most people don't believe me when I say this. You throw everything out of the backlog that you can't get done in 1 week. Already most people say, well, we could never do it in our company. And yet in crisis, they do. And then they put cards in the backlog to redevelop technology and re-architect relationships with their supply chain to allow them to do more things in 1 week. That's it. And that's the Agile journey. I do teach classes on this. They're 2-day seminars. It's a certified Scrum Master seminar that includes the extreme manufacturing Agile hardware endorsement, because I do this with Scrum and group Scrum in hardware. And that is how I teach the hardware endorsement. That is the class I would recommend, even if someone already has a certified Scrum Master credential. So we're doing it in hardware here. They're going to use different tools and they're going to make different contracts with their supply chain. And we'll do that together if we do the seminar together in your companies. Here are the next steps that I will recommend to you, your companies, your clients. If you own a business, identify a member of the board of directors at that level to be a process coach for the business. Then add process coaches to the teams. If you are a member of a team, ask your process coach or your scrum master where you can gain efficiencies in your team. And if you are a process coach or a scrum master, identify the value stream map of the company and sharpen your skills at every opportunity. To make this happen, as these companies are reemerging, I recommend they use Justice's Law to reorganize the company, to restructure the company by product and by product modules. Have remote shift change meetings so that they have a highest likelihood, the lowest risk of having to shut down the company if there's a second wave or if someone starts displaying COVID-like symptoms. I'm going to publish with a book. I'm talking to the Scrum Alliance right now as to the title. I would like to call it the Certified Scrum Master. That was the working title as I published the book. Certified Scrum Master is a trademark of the Scrum Alliance. I don't know if I get to call the book that or not. That was my working title. The book may be called The Scrum Master, 3 words total. We'll see where this goes. I would like to have everyone here contribute to the book. I have never had an idea that didn't get better by collaborating with others. I've written the book saying, we believe, even though I wrote it. What I'd like is for other people to help write it. I'd like for 100 people, if they want to help make this book the book I wish it could be, a complete masterclass of the best and most thorough certified Scrum Master class that we could ever teach. To do that, please take a screen capture or take a picture of your screen of the Bitly logo at the bottom. That'll take you to the Agile publishing page. I'm really happy to have partnered with Vasco, who I believe runs publishing in a truly agile way, to publish this book in a truly agile way. And I would like to have 100 co-authors or editors or pre-readers or proofreaders. If you're interested, please go to this URL and or email me if you forget the URL, or WhatsApp me, and help make this book completely awesome. And I will mandate that it can't be only about software. I wrote it completely agnostic, including hardware practices, because that's still new to a lot of people. But it simply says, here's how to get work done in less than a week. But I gave a lot of hardware examples because that seems to be what's novel. Please join me in pre-reading, proofreading, improving the book, adding good pictures, adding good examples, good case studies, and please join me in authoring the book. I would love that. Thank you very much. That's the presentation.
And I have a question for you. I think you have all those innovative ideas, etc. So can you look into the future, like really like far future, not that far, like 1,000 years, but still a far future. And just imagine that and tell us, like, what do you see? Where do you see the world of work in the future?
Well, I'm so grateful you asked me. I'm happy to share what I believe. Thank you, Zuzi. Is a probable future is that we're going to have full remote, full virtual, with heavily robotic, test-driven development, production centers all over creation, in orbit, likely on the moon, likely on Mars, likely a few other spots. Really, I believe the trend is that direction. And I'm going to get really interesting here for a moment. If you told someone in 1989 that data was going to be free, you just wouldn't have to really buy hard drives. It would just be free. It'd be totally free. Most people would say you're crazy. And yet now data is largely free. And if you were to tell someone in 1989 or even 1990 or even 2008, compute and connectivity are going to be free, they'd say you're nuts. And yet you're crazy. And yet that is where we are. So I'll say something that most of us would say is crazy. Transport to space is going to be free. If we look at the cost of putting stuff into orbit, it's dropping by orders of magnitude. Moore's law is applied to it. It looks like exactly the same trend we saw with data and compute and net connectivity. If that's true, and I believe that's true, and very soon, if that's true, what does that imply? And that's where I'm going with my business. I think the most attractive luxury real estate is real estate with a gorgeous view. And I think the view from orbit is the most luxurious view on the planet. Now, if you had free transport back and forth to orbit multiple times a day, if you did, that might make sense. Now, I don't really like building things for the 1% or the ultra luxury only. My goal is to try to create the most fun, healthy lifestyle, productive lifestyle that almost 8 billion people on the planet could participate in. So it's got to be affordable, it's got to be approachable, it's got to be healthy. And if almost 8 billion people did it, the world should have even more resources and people should be able to have even more cool options, like go to space anytime. But a way to fund that is to start with ultra luxury stuff. So I'm actually developing what I call the mega house. And the eventual goal of that is a space house. And the dimensions of this thing are transportable on the Starship rocket system that SpaceX is developing. And as the cost of this reduces, it may become viable. So I'm doing this in increments. First, it's perfectly terrestrial house, just a very affordable, highly luxurious, highly desirable, I hope, very Instagram worthy house that's very cheap and very light on the environment. And it just happens to be in a form factor that it's compatible with current rocket systems. And it happens to be extremely light. So it's not concrete, it's not wood, it's none of that. It's carbon fiber and aluminum, which I know a lot about from Team Wikispeed, which is a pretty cool house material, by the way. It opens up some nice possibilities. To build that, there's the Mega Factory project, which then is to produce these homes. This is all on the idea of the cost and frequency of space travel is really different than it was 3 years ago and completely different than it was 10 years ago. And the trend is pretty interesting. I think that is closer to the world of work. And I think these are going to be autonomous mega factories with millions of employees working on them 3 hours a day about. I think that's what's really needed. Really intense, really focused, really loving, fun work about 3 hours a day from anywhere. I work from my Tesla race car. I think other people can do this too. Writing great embedded software. I think virtual conferences will continue to be awesome. I love what Agile100 has developed. I hope to get to do it again. I hope to have new valuable content. That's where I think this is going. And for more information on the Mega House, Mega Factory, and what I'm up to, that's done by a nonprofit, Wikispeed. You can see it at wikispeed.org. And we sell these first products for as much as we can, free for nonprofits, but as much as we can to fund the projects, because it does cost a lot to set up factories still. And then I fund that by helping companies do agile transformations and teach Scrum Master classes with hardware. Thank you, Zuzi.
I love it. I'm looking forward for that future. So I have another question from John, which says, where can I find the most detailed writing about business reorganizing under justice law?
Thank you so much for asking. I just finished the manuscript, the draft of that book. That book has the most up-to-date information. I'm starting the next book tonight. Well, people I hope help me edit the first one. And the next book is likely Group Scrum. And it's how to actually re-architect the company. But a lot of it is in the book. Then June 2nd is the next Certified Scrum Master class. We do start every one of those classes the same way I start a transformation by justice's law in a company. So you'd actually do it if you join any of those classes, even if you're already a certified Scrum Master. And I'll be doing a version of that class again on European time with Peter Stevens, and another on June 24th, and another version of that course online on European time with Jürgen Dittmar of Management 3.0 fame. And both of those would be an opportunity to actually do it with me virtually. And then the book, which the first 100 people, it's free. Help me write it, or at least edit it.
Perfect. Thank you. So, what is your one tip which we should all in your mind to live with? What do you think we should all remember? Give us something to live with, right? It's your last talk here today.
You're so kind, Susie. An extra large project is really just 18 extra small projects waiting for object-oriented architecture. And that's how you get hardware into 1 week sprints.
Awesome. All right. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have you here. And I have Sohra back here to close this first round of Agile 100 conference.